Going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're having yourselves a wonderful day wherever you're at and whenever you're watching this. Got another Warhammer 40k video with these guys, and we're jumping in here with Arbiter Ian. This video is every edition of Warhammer 40k in 16 minutes. We recently did a video of his going into the changes from 10th edition, so I'm curious to see what other rules and things like that he can show us to talk about that have changed over the years throughout the various editions of 40k up till now, when we're about to jump in, I guess, the 42nd millennium. As always, links will be down in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, into Arbiter Ian's channel. I would greatly appreciate you guys going over there and checking out his video and channel and giving his video a like, and potentially giving his video a sub if you would like to. And yeah, we'd just appreciate you going over there and checking out his stuff. As you can see, we're doing this reaction live for my YouTube members, so I would love to have you guys come in and join the discussions. If that interests you, there's a join button down below. You can feel free to click that, come in, say hello, and well, yeah, we'd just love to have you guys come in, hang out, and chill while we do these discussions and join in. But with all that being said, we're going to jump in here to this video by Arbiter Ian. Again, every edition of Warhammer 40k in 16 minutes. Let's get into it.
Hi gang, so occasionally I make a video and then I realise that I might have assumed everyone knew a load of stuff I already know, and then I go and make a note to make a video to explain the video I've already made, and yeah, anyway, I've been
making a video to make a video to make a video.
Let's do this for a while. Warhammer 40k has been around since 1987, and in that time it's had 9 different editions. I constantly refer to all of them in all of my videos, but what was the actual difference? What came in the box? What were data faxes?
Yeah, I mean, I've played a decent amount of D&D, you know, so I know D&D, at least, you know, 5th edition. I don't really know much about the tabletop stuff at all in 40k. You know, I've watched a couple of, you know, tabletop games being played. I think I did a reaction to 1 or 2 of them. So like, I understand the idea of, you know, there's different phases and there's obviously dice rolling, but I just don't know like necessarily what the dice mean. I get the concept that, you know, you hit on a certain dice number depending on the unit. You know, depending on the unit's quality also depends on the number that you hit on. Like, you might hit on like a 3 or better. You know, that's pretty good. So that means you have kind of like a 50-50 chance of hitting or not. Kind of a situation. And then they roll for like their defense to see if their armor, you know, takes a lot of the damage, etc., etc. So like, I understand the general concepts, but I don't know like the specific details of the specific faces and what the specific dice rolls mean, and certain unique abilities that factions have, etc., etc. You know, so those are things that I would like to learn more about, and I would love to, again, eventually get into playing the game and recording some of that and all that kind of stuff.
When was the red period? When did plastic models become a thing? Who and why grimdark? So in this video, I'm going to go through a brief history of every edition and point out the important bits. Warhammer 40,000 First Edition was released in 1987 as a single hardback book of game rules, entitled Rogue Trader and written by Rick Priestley. It had no starter set or boxed armies, just a set of rules for playing the game, for generating characters and warbands, and with some background about this brand new setting. Any additional rules were published in White Dwarf magazine, including the very first army lists, and over the life of First Edition, these articles were collected together in compilation books. In addition, there were a few big books that were released that concentrated on various factions, like the Realms of Chaos books or the Orc books, but mostly it was White Dwarf. Models at the time were almost all single-part metal models made from lead, although they'd switch over to pewter within a few years. There were a few multi-part plastic sets.
Well, I bet some of those dudes that have been collecting for forever with those lead pieces, Might want to replace those.
It's for orcs, space marines, Imperial Guard, and squats, and a couple of plastic vehicles, but pretty much everything else was metal. The game itself was scaled for armies of maybe 20 to 40 models and the odd vehicle, and featured a lot of characterful but complicated rules, more like a role-playing game of the time than a streamlined board game. It was recommended that you use games masters or referees who would come up with scenarios and run all the wild animals and civilians and stuff. But while
So it really was kind of played more like D&D. You had a dungeon master that would set up the scenario and rules for you, and that would like monitor the actual battle and kind of mediate any kind of disputes, I guess, that could potentially happen between players. That's interesting. Interesting. Man, the old sculpture of the 40 minutes is such a meme now.
it was hardly the mass market game we know today, it was really popular, and Games Workshop would release hundreds of models over its 6-year lifespan. And that's our starting point, but the game becomes a lot more recognizable with the release in 1993 of the second edition. Look at this! Look at all the colours! Second edition 40k was written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, and it was released as a box starter set, which included all the rulebooks, 2 armies, dice, and some cardboard scenery. To start your 40k journey, you got 20 plastic orc goths, 20 plastic Gretchen, 2 plastic tactical squads, and this fantastic, and I'm pretty sure still tournament legal, cardboard orc dreadnought. Also, there was no separate rulebook. If you wanted to play 40k, you needed to buy this box. This, along with Warhammer Fantasy 4th Edition, was the start of Games Workshop's Red period, where models were painted only in bright primary colours and bases were only and always Goblin Green. It was an obvious shift from the more adult-oriented Rogue Trader to a box product aimed squarely at kids. I remember this being about 40 quid when I was a kid, just in the perfect Christmas present bracket. Models at the time were still mostly metal, shifting to something called white metal in 1997, but each army tended to have a single monopose plastic box set of whatever the most core troop type was. Sergeants and special weapons would still come as metal models in blister packs. Space Marines, as always, were the exception here, with a full tactical squad with 3 sculpts. Also, something that had started in Rogue Trader continued through 2nd edition. That was the trend of releasing metal bodies with a separate sprue of arms and weapons made in plastic. The rules were a complete reset, so the box included Get You By Army List supplements, and soon after we get the very first Codex books. Because of this Codex-based updating, the number of factions was reduced, and loads of smaller factions never made it any further than Rogue Trader. The rules here were broadly the same as Warhammer Fantasy Battle of the same era, simplified from Rogue Trader, but still complex by today's standards. Weapons had range modifiers, which you only see in skirmish games now. Each special unit or weapon tended to have its own entire page of rules and templates. Oh yeah, templates. There was a lot of cardboard in this edition, from custom templates to data faxes for vehicles with custom tables for damage, and war gear cards like magic item cards in Warhammer. This was also the edition of Hero Hammer. Many armies would just...
It's also so interesting to kind of hear that back then, it really was like Warhammer Fantasy was still kind of like the big tabletop, it sounds like. And this was kind of like a sci-fi supplement for those guys that just weren't quite as much into fantasy. And nowadays, it definitely seems like 40k in the space, you know, sci-fi genre is the far more popular one than the fantasy genre is. With I think really kind of like the only big things going on with the fantasy genre stuff are Vermintide and, you know, the Total War Warhammer franchise. I really don't hear much about anything with the tabletop or the books, anything like that in Warhammer Fantasy. I mean, I the only other thing I think I've heard is that they've kind of remade the whole fantasy game with this Age of Sigmar, and they're like redoing it and trying to, I guess, make it kind of more similar to the 40k rules now, I think, if I'm correct. Maybe I'm mistaken like that. But yeah, it's interesting to see how back then it was more like the fantasy was the popular thing, and nowadays it's tipped to more of the 40k being the popular one, and then them kind of changing the fantasy version to match the 40k version. So
be like a couple of squads of the core plastic set and then a load of ridiculously tooled up characters. Totally understandable when you think of the people buying it. Blister packs were a lot easier to buy with your pocket money than metal box sets. Second edition continued for much.
Yeah, that's what I hear. I hear that people don't like the Age of Sigmar at all, and they've changed a lot of stuff in it. I think they've even removed factions. Like, I think the Beastman faction entirely isn't even a thing anymore. So like there's entire armies and factions that just aren't playable if you do the fantasy tabletop anymore. So it's like, what's the point? I always think stuff like that is like a bad decision. Why? Especially things that have been around long enough for people to have like their own armies and stuff. And like, unless you're going to do specific revisions where some of those older models could still be used, like, why would you take away anything? Like, just keep adding to the game. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know. That's a bad little pause of Ian there, but whatever.
Packs were a lot easier to buy with your pocket money than metal box sets. Second edition continued for much of the 90s until the release of third edition in 1998. Third edition was written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, with Gav Thorpe, Ian Pickstock, and Jervis Johnson, and it was released as a softback rulebook with an accompanying box set, as we're kind of used to nowadays. The box set had, as well as the rulebook, plastic terrain and trees, a single Space Marine tactical squad and plastic land speeder, and 20 all-new Dark Eldar Kabalite warriors. They're all multi-part, but there's less of them than last time. Not sure if that's better or worse. Anyway, this was the introduction of Dark Eldar to the game. They didn't exist before that. And through the rest of the edition, Tau and Necrons would be introduced too. I mean, Necrons had a few models in second edition, but third edition was when they'd turn into a full army. The rules were much simpler than second edition. Note how little cardboard there is in this. The big change was the idea of categorizing units and weapons into different types and moving the rules mostly into how the different unit and weapon types interacted with each other.
Well, and I mean, usually that kind of works out for games. Like, you know, there's a reason why 5th edition of D&D is the most popular version of D&D that's played, is because they've really kind of simplified and streamlined a lot of things to make it easier for people to get into. You know, it's the old saying of like, you know, easy to learn but hard to master. Those are always the best kind of like games and game systems. So if you can make a game system like that, you know, like you know, I guess League of Legends would kind of be a good example of like, you know, there's so many, it's the basic concept of League of Legends is the same every game. It's one map. There's, you know, 3 lanes that each side's trying to push, you know, jungle and a couple of little boss camps and jungle camps, etc. But it's just the idea of different characters and combinations of those characters and different matchups and different ways to build them, you know, and learning all of that makes the game what it is. So it's, you know, again, an easy game for pretty much anyone to pick up, but a game that takes, you know, potentially years to even really master and learn everything. So, I mean, yeah, it wasn't like 3rd or 4th edition, super grinding, math heavy. That's why the older D&D buddies tell me. Yeah, D&D 5th is pretty streamlined. It's pretty easy to really get into and learn pretty quickly.
Had the effect of making individual unit rules really streamlined. Codexes in 3rd edition were way smaller, but the core rules became a lot more complex. 40k stuck with this set of rules for the next 4 editions, adding more and more types and categories until it became, well, a mess. But I've got a whole video on that, so let's not go over it again. In short, 3rd edition was a streamlined set of rules which put the focus firmly back on troops and tactics instead of characters and upgrades. As noted from the cover art, recently reproduced for 9th edition, the general tone shifted a bit darker and edgier. This is really the edition where grimdark became a thing. You can tell.
Well, and I think that's kind of just what happened with the time. You know, that's when a lot of, you know, the emo goth stuff started really kind of coming in to, you know, I guess being a little bit more mainstream kind of in the late 90s. It's also, you know, when The Matrix came out. I think The Matrix came out in 99, you know, so there were a lot of kind of, you know, darker movies like that were coming out around that time towards the mid-end to the late 90s. So that was just kind of what was going on in that time period.
By the way, the box set had their Marines painted as Black Templars, the discerning edgelord Space Marine chapter. Despite the codexes being much smaller, 3rd edition had a massive increase in background material. This was the era when Black Library took off. Games Workshop started publishing comic books or background and art books. A lot of these things have been tried before a bit, but this was the era they really became main parts of Games Workshop's production, along with...
Well, I feel like back then, too, again, comics were starting... I think that's when comics were really having a big resurgence, was during the mid and into the late 90s. a lot of the comic book sales were like really starting to take off, I think, around that time, or at least during the 90s in general. I think comics really had kind of a big resurgence. So it only makes sense that they would try to kind of expand the universe into comics and light novels and things like that.
Regular video games and merchandise. The big innovation in models around the time was the return of multi-part plastic kits. It was happening in Fantasy 2 with mixed results. During 3rd edition, we got multi-part plastic kits for the core troops of pretty much every army. Special units were still metal or metal plastic hybrids. As well as the new armies mentioned earlier, we got the first of what would now be called codex supplements, variant rules and army lists for existing codexes, at least one of which was in the form of a campaign supplement for the Eye of Terror campaign. 3rd edition ran for 6 years, and in 2004 it was replaced by 4th edition, which was released as a hardback book and the first...
That's actually pretty quick for a revision, right? 6 years? Ran from the late 90s to 2004, 98 to 2004. That's pretty quick revision. Man, early novels are wild. I mean, yeah, I'm interested to get into them.
2004, it was replaced by 4th edition, which was released as a hardback book and the first name starter set, Battle Former Crag. So this time we have Ultramarines versus Tyranids. The Tyranids get 10 Termagants and 6 Gene Stealers, and the Space Marines just get 1 tactical squad. But there is this crash shuttle and pilot in plastic to make up for it, and a mini rulebook. The rules are listed as being written by Andy Chambers, Pete Haynes, Jervis Johnson and Rick Priestley, and they're less of a shift than at any time before. The rules were basically a consolidated version of 3rd edition, with some of the various similar abilities moved into the core rule set. 3rd edition codexes were still compatible, which meant fewer codices were released in 4th edition. Some armies just used their 3rd edition one all the way through, which wasn't great, but on the other hand, 3rd edition had been around for so long that some of...
I mean, like I said, eventually someday when I'm rich, I'll find copies for all this stuff, and I'll buy hardback copies, or copies in general, whatever I can find for all of us, and we'll have them all.
Of these were actually 3.5 codexes, the second codex an army had received in 3rd edition, and written a little more with 4th in mind. A lot of the codexes in this edition introduced a doctrine system of some sort where you could tailor your arm.
And I mean, it's only smart for Games Workshop to do that at times to, as people go along and time goes by, there's going to be more people that get into this and they're going to want to start collecting things. And there's going to be definitely groups of like hardcore collectors that are going to want to spend money on it. So it's only smart for them to every now and then, 5-10 years, to keep re-releasing some of the older stuff at a higher price for people to collect.
Army to be from a specific planet or chapter, and with things like the Index Astartes books introducing even more variant lists, by the end of 4th edition there were a ton of different variant armies you could take. The art stayed grimdark, but a bit less medieval. There was more colour, more Renaissance than the 3rd edition stuff, and the edition stayed around for a pretty standard 4 years until the release of 5th edition in 2008. The format here was exactly the same as 4th, a hardback book and a box set with a name. This one was Assault on Black Reach, featuring Dark Angels and Orcs, but look at this, way more than previous sets. The Dark Angels got 1 captain, 10 tactical...
I love the Ultramarines revision he's putting on screen there.
Marines, 5 Terminators and a Dreadnought, and the Orcs got a War Boss, 20 boys, 5 knobs, and 3 Orc Deathcopters, which for most of the time they existed were only available in this set. It also came with a mini rulebook. This time it's listed as being written by Rick Priestley and Andy Chambers, with Alessio Cavatore, Pete Haynes, Anthony Reynolds, Jervis Johnson and Adam Troke, which is all the people who wrote 4th and a couple more. And yeah, that checks out. It's 4th edition with even more folded in. Again, old codices remain valid, so in the lifespan of this edition, only about half the factions received new books. Most of the ones left over from 3rd edition were updated, though some had to get by with White Dwarf articles, which people didn't like. Despite the fact that 3rd edition rules were technically still usable in 5th edition, I'd say this is probably the last version of the game before the expansion of rules started to get really silly and almost impossible to keep up with. By this point, armies had a range of plastic kits and vehicles, with only character models and specialists or old releases still hanging around in metal. But during 5th edition, we saw the introduction of Finecast, a sort of resin material, and a lot of the old metal sculpts started to be replaced by the same model, but in Finecast. It didn't go down that well.
They're getting into resin instead of metal and plastic. Probably makes it cheaper for them to be made, etc., etc. So
air bubbles and bendy bits and stuff, but it kind of leveled out over time. There are still people around who hate Finecast, but it's basically no different to buying a Forge World model at this point. 6th edition was released in 2012. This time it was written by Adam Troke, Jeremy Vitok, and Matt Ward.
Damn, well, we're in 10th edition now, so that means they've gone through a lot of editions really quick, revising the game a lot between now and then.
The big names, including Rick Priestley, missing for the first time. This was the shortest edition. It was only around for 2 years, and a lot was released in that time. Games Workshop really embraced the possibility of digital codices for the first time and just went crazy. The starter set was Dark Vengeance, Dark Angels versus Chaos. You got 20 cultists, Chaos Space Marine Chosen, a Chaos Lord, and a Hellbrute, and they would play against a tactical squad, 3 bikers, 3 Terminators, a librarian, and a captain, and the set came with the normal mini rulebook. The models here all shifted to multi-part plastics with Finecast characters. Some metal was still available, but not that much. Also, this was the advent of push-fit models. The whole of this starter set was push-fit and an obvious jump into 3D design. As I said, there were tons of rules released. It was again an updating of 5th edition, but this time we had loads of expansions and campaign books.
I would assume with 3D printing, the Games Workshop probably just 3D prints all their models now, right? That would probably be the cheapest and most efficient way for them to do it, I would think.
Stronghold Assault gave us fortifications, Planet Strike, different ways to play, Escalation introduced super heavies and flyers into the game, and there were all these data slates and data sheets floating around for minor factions which were used as upgrades. Also, Codex supplements were introduced again, first time we'd seen those since 3rd edition really. But the big change to the rule here was formations. This was a new way of building an army that gave you extra special rules if you introduced multiples of the same kit. They were considered interesting to start off with, but they soon went downhill. We also saw the first new faction for a while. Imperial Knights were released then, coinciding with the rules introduction of super heavies and loads of really big models for each faction. Anyway, it didn't last long. There was a lot released and the whole game shifted very quickly into...
I don't know. I would assume so. I would assume they're doing like 3D printed resin models. I would assume. But who knows? Maybe it's not cheaper for them to do it that way. But it's interesting that this is when the bigger Titan models got involved in here. And like I said, there was a streamer that I used to follow, In Control. For those of you out there that know him, used to play StarCraft 2, was a big StarCraft 2 pro, but he was super into Warhammer as well, and he had a Warlord Titan model that he paid a ton of money to have custom made and I think painted for him, and it was awesome when he showed it to us on stream. So it's pretty crazy how some of the scale of some of these things can be.
With the rules introduction of super heavies and loads of really big models for each faction. Anyway, it didn't last long. There was a lot released and the whole game shifted very quickly into 7th edition in 2014. This is also when they stopped putting author names on everything, so this is by Games Workshop. The rules for 7th edition were released as this lovely 3-book box, giving you background, model tips, and, you know, the rules themselves. But the starter kit for this was still Dark Vengeance. It had only been out for 2 years after all, and the models in it were, well, really nice. Generally, from this point, it's all going to start to sound quite familiar. Models had started to be packaged in the familiar form we have today, plastic box sets that do 2 similar versions of a unit. Plus, there were plastic character boxes. Some characters were still in Finecast, but plastic seemed to be the way forward from now on. In 7th edition, most main factions got a codex, more codex supplements were released, and these eventually just became mini codexes. Adeptus Mechanicus, Harlequins, Genestealer cults, and Deathwatch were turned into full armies with their own codices, and Custodes and Sisters of Silence were ported over from Heresy. Rules updates were then carried out through the now familiar approach of big campaign series. Sanctus Reach, Black Crusade, and finally Gathering Storm all added new rules and new formations to existing factions. We also saw the introduction of prestige boxes and box games, as well as alternate starter sets. Army boxes like Stormclaw and Deathmask had rulebooks as well as 2 small armies, but other box sets like Deathwatch Overkill, Shadow War Armageddon, or Renegade were standalone games that many people just used to get cheaper.
Damn, so look at the size of those models. It's crazy.
Models or terrain. Finally, towards the end of 7th edition, the Gathering Storm books pushed the story forwards for the first time in 30 years, giving us Primaris Marines, the return of Robert Guillermin, and the Sicker. Yeah,
I wonder what how the Primaris Marines are in the tabletop, what kind of like unique rule sets they have, and I guess what their unit cost is in comparison.
Trix Maledictum, and paving the way for 8th edition. So this should be getting really familiar now. 8th edition was released in 2017. It was another complete rules set. This is the first time the rules were completely reset since 1998. The big starter set for 8th edition was Dark Imperium.
So I guess 8th edition was like a big change, huh? Complete rule set change.
Containing a full hardback rulebook and 2 armies. Pretty big armies by anyone's count. Space Marines got a Primaris Captain, 2
I know these fucking things from Demon Hunters, man. They're so annoying.
2 Primaris Lieutenants, 1 Primaris Ancient, 2 5-man Intercessor squads, a 3-man Inceptor squad, and a 5-man Hellblaster squad. And their enemies, the Death Guard, got a Lord of Contagion, a Noxious Blightbringer, the name started to go really silly around here, a Malignant Plaguecaster, 7 Plague Marines, 1 Bloat Drone, and 20 Death Guard.
Yeah, I think that's what he said. I think he said 8th edition introduced Primaris. And like I said, I'm interested to know what kind of different rules they have for the Primaris versus normal. I would assume they probably have similar ones. Maybe they just have certain abilities, but they're just like, they might have a higher unit cost because they're just better versions of Astartes. You know, I don't know.
Plaguecaster, 7 Plague Marines, 1 Bloat Drone, and 20 Death Guard Poxwalkers.
Bloat Drone.
But during this period, there were loads more starter kits and prestige boxes released. We're pretty much at now by this point. All the models are what is currently familiar. Many of the codices are still in use in 9th edition, but it's worth pointing out what was new in 8th edition. The first obvious new thing was the rules reset, which simplified and streamlined the core rules to better represent the breadth of models that now existed in the range. And because of this reset of rules, Games Workshop had to release a series of index books with data slates for all in-publication models so that you could use them. With just the core rules and the index books, this was probably the most streamlined and easy to learn version of 40k since 3rd. 8th edition also formally introduced the 3 ways to play idea. These had always been kind of present, but now open, narrative, and match play were clearly defined.
I think open play is the only thing I've seen. Maybe not. I don't know. Maybe it's also match. I don't know. I'm curious what the differences are between these various variations in play.
Of course, match play instead of being tournament mode just immediately became seen as the default way to play, ruining the game for everybody else. The other two were largely ignored, and that kind of tied in with a bigger theme of 8th edition, which was that Games Workshop started to at least make a concession towards caring about competitive play. Jury's still out on how much. All the codexes were released in really quick succession over the next couple of years, and these codexes added things like stratagems and various...
That's kind of surprising to me that they aren't they aren't building a competitive scene as much as you would think they would, especially with the internet nowadays, dude. You would think that with streaming and with the internet that like there would be an audience out there for people to want to watch competitive, you know, tabletop 40k and fantasy, but just in general, also people just be interested in playing it, you know, leagues. People getting together and doing it. So that's surprising to me that they haven't like tried to form their own leagues and build that more. You know what I mean? Like I could understand back in the day it being more difficult, you know, because like what network television, you know, channel is going to want to, you know, fill out a slot for a bunch of nerds playing, you know, Warhammer tabletop. But with the internet and streaming, that, you know, is open to anyone who wants to watch it. So that surprises me. It's a little 40k has become an esport. I don't know, maybe tabletop simulator 40k can turn into that. Yeah, I mean, and I've said that too. Like, it surprises me that they haven't just made their own like digital version of this for people to play, and that it's like tabletop simulator is the thing that you got to go to do this. You would think that, you know, they would want to make a digital version of this game where they could have kind of a DM or whatever that could set up the scenario as they wanted to and the rules as they wanted to, or two people could just get together and just play the game and have, you know, the game itself, you know, be the DM and have a random scenario set up. Because I mean, they would also then, you know, they could sell the books digitally as they wanted to. They wouldn't have to worry about hardcovers. They could all be tied into that you know, game itself, they would no longer have to like print minis for people to buy if they didn't, you know. I mean, I'm sure there would still be people that would be out there that would want to have, you know, physical copies of their minis to paint and have, and, you know, just have them to build their armies. I know I would if I had that spare kind of cash, but they could still sell digital versions of these different units and minis. They could have like starter packs and bundles for the different armies and different chapters, you know, et cetera, et cetera. And then, you know, they could have different bundles and packs and minis and specials that, you know, they could sell for these digital, you know, things. And they could, even if they wanted to, for like 99 cents, you know, have different skins and variations for them that they could, you know, sell, and, you know, have microtransactions for it, like every fucking game has nowadays. And they would make a fortune, you know, they would make a fortune. I think they would probably make more money doing that than they would, you know, trying to sell the physical copies. But that's me. And then again, they could then, you know, try to, you know, get, you know, leagues and streams going. It could be a situation where they wouldn't have to necessarily have physical locations for people to have these tournaments. The tournaments could be held online. You know, I mean, I guess they, you know, might want to have physical locations for it just to cut down on cheating if they're going to have like actual prize money be involved. Because whenever there's prize money involved in games, you know, cheating is always something people are going to do to make money. So I don't know. It just feels, it's just, to me, it's just strange that, you know, they aren't updating their game for the modern era by making a digital version of it. There's always going to be people that want the physical version and have the tabletop, but why not also just make it more accessible for those that want to just play it in a digital format, or might not, you know, be able to have access. They don't have, you know, a group of people to play with, essentially, like me, for example. I don't have a group of people in real life to play with, you know. I could potentially find some and put some money into it, but it would be far easier to find a bunch of people like you guys. Like, I know if there was a digital version of 40k tabletop, you guys would probably have the game and I would have the game, and we'd probably play it together against each other or with people, you know, et cetera, et cetera. You know, whereas, you know, we don't live close enough to each other to be able to do that IRL. So I don't know. It seems strange to me. It just seems kind of strange to me. I mean, shit, NBA 2K Online team have turned into their own sport with contracts and revenue. Right. They don't want to accuse themselves of making a better product and might cut into the physical sales. I mean, true, but at the same time, they would probably end up making more money overall, because they would have less overhead, but also B, any physical stuff they could probably just jack the price up on physical stuff and say, hey, there's not as much of a demand for it, so we're not making the physical things as often. So if you want it, you got to pay it for a premium. And there'd still be people that would pay it, while still also making more on their digital sales. They would have less overhead on the digital stuff. They don't have to make actual, you know, spend physical resources to make the physical stuff. It's just essentially labor for the people to code it and make the game. You know what I mean? So I don't know. Yeah, Guild Wars or Games Workshop is too stubborn to make more money in the long run. You know, I'm not going to right. I would never assume Game Workshop would want to make a logical decision. It's all about tabletop with them. Right. And project really think themselves the Apple, the tabletop. That's true. That's true. They want everyone to conform to their idea, and yeah, they don't want to update for the modern age, I guess. So anyway, I guess that rant and tangent over. Let's get back to the last little bits of this video here.
Seemingly quite complex, factual of years, jury's still out on how much. All the codexes were released in really quick succession over the next couple of years, and these codexes added things like stratagems and various seemingly quite complex faction special rules, and various campaign supplements were released which started to add on even more rules, and the familiar rules bloat started to emerge.
Wasn't there a kids game that tried having there be physical models you needed to buy to use in game? I don't know. I'm sure there probably was something like that. Or that would give you bonuses if you did. I think Nintendo may have done something like that. but it wasn't something that I really ever got into.
Supplements were released which started to add on even more rules, and the familiar rules bloat started to emerge again, with the rules for a faction spread over multiple books and hundreds of optional extras to combo up and break the game with, which then resulted in FAQs and so on and so on. All this continued into 9th edition, released in 2021, which is the year I'm making this, so this doesn't really feel like a history anymore. Anyway, mostly 9th edition was a slight rules update and a new set of starter boxes. The main addition to the game was that narrative was replaced by Crusade mode, a sort of structural campaign system where your army improves over time. Match play is still...
See, I mean, that's another thing that they could easily do with the digital version. They could have, like, actual, like, super long multiple battle like crusade scenarios that could go back and forth between players, like, you know, like the game Risk is, you know, famous for people being able to play that for potential months before games end, you know, because of the back and forth that could happen. So then imagine having, you know, multiple battle campaign scenarios set up in 40k that can be played out digitally, where, you know, you could just save the game when people need to be done playing, and then they can get back to it whenever they want to. You know what I mean? It just makes things that much more easier. Spiral, yeah, Amiibo. Yeah, you're right. That's right, Amiibo. I remember that thing to do over there. Right. But I'm just saying it would be that much more easy. It would be much more simplified and easy to maintain and keep up with in a digital version in a game where you just have a save file and you could back that save file up, as opposed to have all this physical stuff. You got to worry about potentially units being moved and shit like that. You know what I mean? When people aren't there and playing it. I don't know. I just think it just baffles me that a lot of these people and companies don't want to, you know, come into the modern age with certain things that would clearly be a better benefit for them if they just did it.
Unfortunately, the main way to play, but Crusade's got some traction. And there we are,
right,
9 editions over 30 years. As 40k goes from being a complex skirmish level game played with metal soldiers, to a mass market product aimed at tweens and teenagers, to an edgy, grim, dark shared universe, and with the most recent additions to being quite a self-aware part of a wider tabletop gaming ecosystem. The model range, the artwork that accompanies them, and the game itself has changed constantly in that time, in response to marketing demands, or changing demographics in the player base, or the changing expectations of the wider gaming industry. And I don't think that's going to stop anytime soon. Thanks for watching.
Alright, well, there we go. That is another great video by Arbiter Ian. As always, links for his original video without my commentary and reaction down in the description, and to his YouTube channel. If you would do me a favor, if you enjoyed watching this video of his, go over to his channel and give this video a like, and check out the rest of his YouTube content. He has a lot of 40k content. It's definitely worth giving a sub. Go support the man. Yeah, I mean, interesting video. I was hoping, one of the things that a lot of these videos I wish we'd get into a little bit more, but I understand why they necessarily can't, because it would be a lot more time consuming, would be like a lot of the rule sets and just how the rule sets have changed. You know, he doesn't really go into what the actual kind of rules were, other than like earlier editions, I guess, were kind of more played like a D&D game with some units, and then as things went by, you know, that kind of changed. And there were different times where things would get more streamlined, and then as they started releasing codexes and revisions, you know, you would have this bloat that would happen, and then they'd have to cut it back down. It seems like 8th edition is kind of, I guess, the most recent major change to the rule sets and how they get played, and then 9th and 10th have just been revisions on top of that. And it seems like, you know, they're updating the game quite, you know, recently. I think he said 8th edition came out in 2017, and, you know, here we are in 2024 with, you know, now being 10th edition. So it seems like every few years they're kind of revising stuff and updating and adding stuff. So it's cool to see. It's cool to see. But like I said in our discussions that we had just a little bit ago, like, I just don't understand why they don't, you know, do things digitally, man. Have a digital game with the digital marketplace. Have some, you know, basic starter armies that you could get into, that you could customize maybe in certain ways. They could add skins to different models, and you know, ways to prick out, you know, their guns and give your army kind of a unique aesthetic to them. Even, you know, for the you could have you know, a chapter of Dark Templars, and it could look totally different from another chapter of Dark Templars that your friends have. And I just think it would be a lot easier, obviously, to do and maintain, and more people get into, and they'd make more money with. But what do I know? You know what I mean? No having to go to a hobby store just to play, and no more transportation has. Yeah, exactly. I mean, that alone, having to keep boxing up all your units, the potential for them to break while traveling, a potential for someone to steal some of your minis, you know, in those kind of scenarios, you know, a lot of that stuff would get avoided. Getting an army place without proper storage is pain and risky your minis. Yeah, if you understand the rules, I've just been getting more streamlined since 8th, but are essentially working in the same system. The updates are so often, a lot of books become obsolete by the end of the edition, some of them at the gate. Man, if I could customize my own personal digital 40k armor, you guys, yeah. I mean, we'd probably just sit here in Discord, just chilling and doing that, you know? I'd probably have streams of me just sitting here, like, chilling and chatting with you guys while I was messing around with my 40k armies and minis and theory crafting strategies and how I'd want to group them up, you know, etc., etc. But it is what it is. It is what it is. So, but yeah, that's gonna do it for this video, guys. Like I said, links down below to Arbiter Ian's channel in this original video. Go over there, give the video a like, give this channel a sub, show the man some support. We're doing this video here live for my YouTube members, as you can see. Would love to have you guys come in and join the discussions that we have before, during, and after these videos. If that has any interest to you, click the join button down below the video. Check out the YouTube membership benefits that I offer. See if any of them have any interest to you, and come join, come hang out, have a good time. I'd love to see you guys. But regardless of that, I appreciate you guys just coming in, hanging out, chilling. Hope you're having a wonderful day whenever you're watching this. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like and a sub, as it helps me and helps the channel grow. And yeah, thank you guys very much. Appreciate you. Hope you're having a wonderful day. We'll see you guys in the next one.